This is City Focus, the podcast from the League of Oregon Cities, where we explore the issues that matter to cities across Oregon.
It has been a year since the governor mandated statewide COVID lockdowns, and as cities across Oregon have complied, many have grappled with the challenges of safeguarding their communities and keeping local businesses vibrant and successful. On today's episode, Sandy Mayor Stan Pulliam joins me for a conversation about his city and the efforts happening in Sandy to support citizens and businesses. Sandy Mayor Stan Pulliam, welcome to City Focus.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I understand you were born and raised in Sandy.
Yep.
So obviously you love Sandy. So let's talk a little bit about the city of Sandy from your perspective.
Yeah, Sandy. So Sandy to me is one of the most remarkable places on the planet. And of course, I'm totally biased. I grew up there here in Sandy and decided to return home with my wife Mackenzie to raise our own kids here. But we're perfectly sized, we're quickly growing, but we're getting these kind of really neat amenities and recreational activities. Obviously, we're at the base of Mount Hood. And so we have access to the mountain like everybody in Oregon. You go the other way and you can get to the ocean. We're only 25 miles outside of Portland, which obviously is a huge economic base for a lot of our neighbors out here in Sandy to be able to work there, but then get back home out here in Sandy. I feel all the time that when I'm here in Sandy, I feel like I'm kind of away from it all, but I'm able to get to it as well, right? And then it's the people here was a big reason why we returned. When I was younger, I think a lot of people going through high school, you're trying to figure out who you're going to be and become, and you're scared of that. And our community, for at least in my experience, they really lifted me up, as someone in high school and put together money to send me on leadership opportunities, trips to Washington, D.C. that really just kind of, ignited a passion in me for civics and community engagement. And a lot of that, and I know we'll talk about this later on, but, so when I talk to my small business owners here in town and, and their struggles, these are people, a lot of them that were there for me, at a very, important part of my life. I look at them and they've sponsored mine and my kids' t-ball teams and, basketball teams. And as mayor, we had, crazy wildfire season. And so I had to call our small business owners to step up to the plate. And so, they are always there. So we're a community that still really looks out for each other. We're, I remember when I came home from college, all of a sudden it was like, holy smokes, we got a Fred Meyer's and a movie theater, we're really growing. So we're getting a lot of those things, but you go to the store and you still run into a couple of people that and you know their name and their backstory. And so Sandy's just a really special place. I could go on all day about how much I love it here. And I can't forget Joe's Donuts and Mountain Mocha and all those kinds of things that everybody loves.
I love it. I actually grew up in a really small town in central New Hampshire, and I understand that vibe and I miss it. And I think a lot of people are nostalgic for it a little bit too. So I think you're very lucky to have Sandy to still kind of maintain that small town charm.
Yeah.
But you said you can kind of feel like you can get away from it all there. But in essence, this year, 2020, is the year. I think it's been a blur for a lot of people. It's not something we ever want to repeat, even though we're kind of still feels like 2020 2.0 a little bit coming into 2021.
Yeah.
So in early, about this time when we're recording this podcast, about this time last year, the governor issued COVID lockdown mandates, and that affected every city in Oregon. So I wanted to talk to you now. How did your city initially respond to this? And then I want to talk a little bit about how you're handling it now, a year or so later.
Yeah. So initially, I'm right there with, I think every other mayor and leader and neighbors where we were scared, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got this highly contagious disease virus coming from overseas, the media hysteria about it. And I was someone that really linked in and with what other communities were doing with some of these shutdowns, you don't know what's coming. And so you've got to kind of adapt to that and figure out what's going on. And I'll tell you, though, really on the early days, and I'll start with some of the things that bothered me,
Okay.
So I go all the time. I would attend these mayor's meetings and these meetings that we have through the League of Oregon Cities. And And a lot of the time, and I don't think this is new to probably anyone listening who'll be listening to this, but we complain a lot about home rule, people coming in and stepping on our local authority and kind of dictating things to us from the state or federal level as to what we should be deciding to do in our communities. And what bothered me was right off the bat, we had a bunch of mayors that stepped forward and asked the governor to do a statewide lockdown, right? And so here we gather at all these meetings. We're always talking, we're always advocating for home rule and local authority. And at the first sign of crisis, we decided to ask the governor to tromp all over our local authority, and to impose a statewide shutdown, lockdown. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's why, I worry a big reason for that is just we had a lot of people that didn't want to have to face their constituents and neighbors with some of these hard decisions that we had to make. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I know why I ran for office, which was to make these decisions and to work in conjunction with our neighbors and make these decisions in a way that works best for us here locally, on the ground in our unique situations. And so right off the bat, that was a disappointment. And then we implemented a lot of programs, like a lot of communities. We did small business relief funds. We jumped right out of the box with our urban renewal with that. And then like so many others, when the CARE Act dollars came through, we were able to reimburse ourselves for that. And I learned a very important lesson off that process that we'll speak to here in a little bit. We also did I can't remember the exact name, but it was like, Sandy gift cards that care, which what we did is we did gift cards to local businesses here in Sandy, and then we gave them out to our most vulnerable. So the folks that were really struggling, that needed that kind of assistance, they got it. And then they used it to shop at our local businesses, that were struggling. And so it kind of had a double whammy effect. But of course, nothing was going to replace these shutdowns that happened. And I'd been I mentioned how scared I was. People talk a lot about follow the science. Yeah. I feel like that's exactly what I've done, right? We were cautious at the very beginning. We went along with a lot of the shutdowns, but as we learned more about the virus and its effects, we adapted to that. And that's where I really started speaking out. So early on, I said, these shutdowns, I get it, but we need to have a nuanced conversation about whether or not we should be stopping our economy. And then that grew into, all right, we have these phase 1 shutdowns. When do we get to phase 2? And we actually started to negotiate a kind of a phase 1.5, Clackamas County, kind of a tri-county area with the governor. And then boom, right? We had the second full shutdown that came. And so it happened, my phone started ringing immediately with the second shutdown. What I think we saw was some businesses made it through the first barely. They spent the summer, especially these restaurants and bars on Main Street, reinvesting in their business, doing these outdoor areas for seating to increase their capacity for these numbers coming through, just to get it to pencil out, a little bit. And here they get all set up for it, and then bam, the governor comes down with this full shutdown. And it was, my phone rings off the hook. A couple of days later, I get this text message from a local restaurant owner. And she says, can you come talk to me at 3:00? And I walk through the door, and she's recruited just about every Main Street small business owner in our community. And of course, they kind of knew where I was, before that. But they demanded an audience, and they said, we got to open. We're going to the holiday season. Our employees aren't being made whole. We don't know if we're going to be able to reopen our doors. We're to the end here. And they were ready to open against this mandate, which kind of, generated all kinds of news and attention. And I told them, I said, I don't control the OSHA, the Oregon Lottery Commission, Liquor Control Commission. And, they said, well, we're to the end. We truly are. How do we open? I said, well, if I'm you, I would only open if I had a mass opening. And that's really kind of what led to that New Year's movement. With that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, and we've continued on. And I mentioned right off the bat, and then I'll finish up, is we've given the local business relief dollars, and then we were able to reimburse our urban renewal fund, with the CARE Act. And so what I started thinking is what are some ways that we can use those urban renewal dollars to invest in things now knowing that most likely we were going to get a stimulus package later down the road that we could reimburse ourselves on. So what we did was this outdoor structured program. Now, as anyone who drives through Sandy can recognize, we have kind of a unique style, a Sandy architectural style.
Mm-hmm.
And so these outdoor areas are going to be formed very much in that same style. And we developed a program using urban renewal where our city will pay for 80% of those construction costs.
Wow.
20% from the business owner. So they have, they've got some skin in the game. And of their 20%, they can pay an interest-free installment over the course of the next 3 years. Because obviously they're hurting for cash right now in the middle of these shutdowns. So what we have now is we were able to we have 7 going online. It's actually starting construction on the pilot project here this weekend. But we have these beautiful outdoor covered areas. They're going on these outdoor patios outside our restaurants and bars. It's giving these folks increased capacity. I had one tell me that it was going to increase their sales nearly 30%.
Wow.
Just from the increase of capacity. And now it's long lasting for years into the future. Our community is going to be able to enjoy this. And then here came the stimulus money, and it's looking like very likely that we're going to be able to reimburse ourselves for that program. So here we have economic stimulus where we're helping out our Main Street businesses. Our neighbors are going to enjoy it for many years to come. And our urban renewal funds now going to get full as a result of reimbursing ourselves. So that's just an example of how you can think outside the box, and really get these things going in a reasonable amount of time.
So you talked about too, you early on, you were like you said, thinking outside the box, and you had business owners and community members coming to you to try to sort of strategize ways to get through this. One of the things you did talk about, you had established the Main Street Mayors Association at some point. And then, like you said, you got a lot of state and you got a lot of national attention for that. You were on many news shows. In the state of Oregon, did you find kinship with other mayors that wanted to kind of work with you to maybe duplicate those efforts in their cities? What happened with that?
Yeah, I think it's like everything, and this is great. Is you find a lot of commonality and things that you agree on, and things that you want to move forward on, and then there's some things that might just be a little too far, right? Yeah. And so with the Main Street Mayors, we called that meeting and kind of organized that group right after the second shutdown, and that was a lot of that was right in the middle of kind of this New Year's Day movement, where as a mayor, I feel like I needed to really stand up for my small business owners, my community, who were making kind of the last ditch courageous decision to open up, against the mandate. It wasn't to thumb your finger at the governor. It was to survive. Yeah. And I feel the need to really support them. And so we did a conference call. We ended up with about 40 mayors, 20 of which were very supportive of that. That's a big ask, is to support businesses opening up against the governor's mandate, right? Yeah. And so while a lot of mayors were very outspoken and not liking the mandate, wanting to support businesses, that was just a bridge too far, to go against the mandate. Others of us felt like we were there, here's the bridge. There's very little choice. I don't know if, NFIB says we're going to lose about a third of our small, Main Street small businesses. And so what am I going to be mayor of exactly, especially in a community like Sandy that's so dependent on our Main Street? I viewed it as, there's not a choice. We've got to stand up for our Main Street and our community members. But we've continued to stay engaged with Main Street mayors. And while it started off there, we're looking at kind of transition exactly what you're talking about, which is, what are some outside the box, innovative things that our communities can do to really, push it forward and help out our businesses. And so that group's continued to stay engaged and share ideas, and we're only looking to grow it.
So as you look across, like I said, we're kind of, as we're recording this podcast, we're about a year into this, and you look out at other states. A lot of other states are starting to open up. They're loosening restrictions. In your conversations with other mayors within this group, is there frustration that Oregon isn't moving as quickly? Would you like to see that move quicker, or are you okay with how it is with the plan that's been laid out?
Yeah, I think, mayors feel a lot like Oregonians, which is we're sick and tired of being last place, like all the time. right? We're last place, near the last sometimes with getting the kids back into schools, which is so important for our local communities. And you're last place, with the vaccine, distribution and what happens there. It seems like we're always, pushing against it here in Oregon when you look around, neighboring states and communities and what they're able to accomplish and get done. So, there's a tremendous amount of frustration, especially when you see, Portland may not be as dependent on their Main Street businesses, but us mayors outside of Portland absolutely are. I mean, they're the heart and soul. When you think about, the I-5 corridor, like our community, that's Highway 26, going down it. I mean, that is the lifeblood of economic activity. And so to just kind of turn your back on that, especially when you see, some of the numbers being so low, particularly here in Oregon, the death rate, being, we talk death rate, but the survival rate, being so astronomically high, you've really got to start, asking yourself about the totality of the impact, of these decisions. And I think as mayors, we're on the front lines. And so we understand every decision we make has a multitude of impact. And so it's hard for some of us to understand why you only listen to medical professionals. Now, I get it. You got to listen to medical professionals, but you got to take in that advice and you've got to think, all right, now where's my economic advisor? Right. And where's my education advisor? And how are the decisions we're making over here impact these? And what are the consequences? And am I able to live with these consequences based on, the consequences of a shutdown or larger spread of COVID? And it just feels like that's not all being weighed right now. It's strictly, hospital bed capacity and all those kinds of things, which seem to never materialize into these outrageous, projections that we get. We keep being told something's going to happen. And then when it doesn't happen, we get patted on the back as if, we did it. Maybe it's they were wrong. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
It's always good to ask the questions, and it's always good to have more conversation. That's one of the challenges. I think, Oregon, again, is so geographically diverse. It's such a big state. What works well in Portland, like you said, or Salem isn't going to necessarily work in Hermiston or Sandy. So that's a challenge for many, many issues that we face.
Well, and more importantly, I just want to see those decisions being made in Portland and made in Hermiston and made in Sandy. Don't get me wrong. There's totally there's a role for state government and all of that. But, when I think about my Sandy City Council, we got a variety of opinions on our Sandy City Council and backgrounds and everything else. Yeah. But, we're also able to get a tremendous amount done. And the reason we are is we're neighbors. And when we get problems in front of us, we tackle those problems as neighbors to understand our community. And guess what? We want a great place to live, and we're all living in the same place. And those are where the decisions need to happen. And I think that's just been the biggest frustration is being told by people who don't understand your community or the dynamics of it, what's best for you, and not allowing you to kind of chart your own course. And while we've seen smaller, versions of that, throughout time, and we kind of started talking about some of the complaints that happen out of that. This has really shown it, And my hope is when we get COVID behind us, we got to have some real conversations. I mean, quite honestly, we got to have conversations about how much our council manager form of government works in crises like this. We've got to talk about the county's role versus, a city role versus the state, emergency powers that the governor has versus what a mayor can get. And is this right? Should they have these emergency powers? And if they should, in what circumstances? Because I'll tell you, a wildfire in an emergency is a lot different than a slow burn of a pandemic and COVID. And so, to give the governor unilateral power for 3 weeks during a wildfire, well, in a lot of ways, that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But to provide, this full power for now over a year, in the case of this pandemic, that seems to make a lot less sense to me.
So looking forward into 2021 and beyond, are you optimistic?
Optimistic. Well, I'm always optimistic. I'm optimistic because I know the people, and I know Oregonians, and I know how, I know our tenacity and what we fight through and what we're capable of. And so, I am optimistic about what we'll be able to do as communities and to come together. My hope is, and I say this a lot lately, is in an unprecedented time, sometimes you get unprecedented results. And, I think people are starting to pay attention now. All of a sudden, folks that were not looking at what was going on in their local governments and politics because that doesn't affect them. Well, guess what? What 2020 has proven, it does affect you and it can affect you. And so I'm optimistic that people are kind of, awakening to that fact that, attention's now started to go to executive level power of governors and mayors and kind of, how we play and partake in these decisions in our local communities and where the power centers are, and with schools and, where the teacher unions are, truly how powerful they are. And I think we're going to get a lot of people maybe looking at the world a little bit differently. And as a result, we might have some different results in leadership here in Oregon. And I'm just one that thinks that a change in leadership in Oregon would be, it'd be a really good thing.
Well, I think you're right. Truly, a lot of people have had their eyes open. A lot of times, people do, I don't want to get involved in politics. It doesn't really affect you. And you talk about local at the most local level, the mayor and city council level, school board level. Those really do. Those individuals making those choices have much more impact on your day-to-day life than anything happening in Washington, D.C. So I think in that respect, that's probably a silver lining in a lot of this, is that there's a lot of eyes that have been open, and hopefully there'll be a lot more civic engagement as a result.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And then everything's just become a lot more extreme, and so it's really some of these issues that we face in the communities, whether it's local policing or infrastructure, everything's been really magnified. And so, but that's great. People are more aware of what's going on in their communities and kind of the makeup and feelings of their council and their leadership positions. And that's where we should be as a country. And as a state, it's pretty exciting. But I'm an optimistic person, and I think there's maybe a little pent up demand out there. And so as we come out of COVID, I'd like to see the economy kind of growing and moving as people are kind of coming out of their homes and recreating and playing and getting back to kind of their normal lives. And so I think there's a lot to really look forward to. And there's kind of this new world, that we're entering into, which I think is going to be a bit of a hybrid between how things used to be and then, where we ended up. And, I don't think a lot of times people are going to have to spend times away from their families to go to a meeting when they can just, pop on Zoom and have that meeting and get back to their family. And so there's just traffic congestion, how we meet traffic flows with a new kind of more virtual work at home environment. I think it's going to be really incumbent on elected leaders to look around and say, okay, let's take a pause and let's figure out what the world actually is today, and how we move forward in that and how we invest, in that and where do we put our money and what that world looks like. It should be exciting if we all come together and work together and think through these things as a community and leave partisan politics to the side. And that's, we're talking here on the League of Oregon Cities, which is, nonpartisan. We have these nonpartisan councils, and that's where I'd love to see the decisions being made.
I think that's a good optimistic note to wrap up on today, our conversation. Any final thoughts you want to impart to our listeners?
No, just, this has been a hard year, a year and a half, 2 years, so I've been mayor. I'm going into my second term. They're 2-year terms. So I guess I don't really know any different, I guess this is what it's like now. But I think just to wrap up on just that optimistic tone, is that there's all kinds of opportunity now in front of us as Oregonians. We have fought through a tremendous amount together over the course of the last year, and let's come together and let's chart the future, together. And let's take a hard look at what we've done and how we've reacted, and let's not point fingers at the things that went wrong. This is uncharted territory. Nobody knows best. I've certainly had my disagreements with the governor. I do not think the governor's a bad person. I think she's trying to make the decisions best that she sees fit. And my hope is if we look back at some of the things I've done that were wrong, we go, okay, so the next time let's do it a little bit differently. And I hope we can do that as a state now, because, we're all works in progress, and we're a work in progress here in Oregon. And let's just come together and just, let's make Oregon in the future what we used to be, let's do that.
Sandy, Mayor Stan Pulliam, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts on this with our listeners. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of City Focus. We will be talking with more mayors from across our state to hear their stories and how their communities are faring as we move forward into 2021 and beyond. If you're a mayor or city councilor from Oregon and would like to share your city story on the podcast, send me an email at cityfocus@orcities.org.